June 1942, Western Desert, North Africa. The wind cuts across the Sahara, whipping sand against steel like tiny bullets. A British Crusader tank sits silent amid the heat shimmer, its engine ticking after hours of movement. Inside, 4 men breathe air thick with fumes, sweat and dust. Their water is rationed, their rations metallic and dry. But it isn't fuel, ammunition, or even oxygen they desperately crave at this moment. It's tea, not luxury, not comfort. Morale, focus, life. In the brutal, suffocating interior of a desert tank, tea wasn't a drink, it was a lifeline. And yet to brew it, these men must do the unthinkable. Climb out. The commander climbs from the hatch. The turret crew follows. They crouch behind the tank, striking a match, heating a mess tin. The ritual is quick, practiced, almost automatic. British soldiers have fought empires, crossed oceans, survived sieges, but they cannot fight without tea. In this army, the drink is not habit. It is identity. It is strength. It is sanity. Somewhere beyond the dunes, German gunners watch for movement, scanning for silhouettes. The tank commander pours hot water, unaware that for enemy sharpshooters this fleeting moment, a kettle steaming behind desert armour, is the easiest target of the day. In minutes a shell lands. Sand and steel erupt. The Crusader burns. The tea spills and mixes with dust and blood. 4 men never re-enter their tank. This wasn't rare, it was routine. Across North Africa, crew after crew died not in battle formations, but in the quiet acts of human need. British tank doctrine offered no internal cooking device. To eat or drink hot liquid, you exited, and, in desert warfare, exposure meant death. Reports, diaries, and war records show an astonishing pattern. Tanks lost not in combat charges, but during tea breaks. The tanks were armoured, the crew was not. By mid-1942, veteran officers knew the pattern well. The moment a turret hatch opened, German panzer crews prepared to fire. Survival wasn't bravery, it was timing. Drink too early, you burned precious fuel reserves. Drink too late, dehydration clouded judgment. On the front lines, caffeine wasn't a comfort. It was combat readiness. The British Army prized discipline. It built tanks to move, shoot, and survive. But in armoured warfare, the mind is a weapon too, and men cannot fight when heat, exhaustion, and thirst choke their senses. Tea steadied hands, it sharpened vision. It calmed terror. But the war machine had no space for humanity, until one wounded soldier changed everything. Later that year, a 21-year-old wireless operator lay in a military hospital in England. Burns along his arms, concussion, shrapnel in his leg. He survived, barely because he exited his tank to boil water. He stayed alive long enough to see the cost. And, in his hospital bed, as nurses changed bandages and doctors checked his pulse, he picked up a pencil. He did not draw a battlefield. He did not sketch tanks charging across dunes. He drew a kettle, a metal vessel fitted inside a tank, powered by the vehicle's electrical system, able to boil water without exposing a single crewman. A tiny, almost ridiculous idea. But war turns ridiculous things into necessity. He knew command would laugh, soldiers joke, engineers hesitate, quartermasters reject, governments delay. But he'd seen death at tea time. He'd tasted smoke and dust instead of breakfast. And he understood one truth. To fight, men must live first. He handed the sketch to a visiting officer. Weeks passed, paper moved across desks. Some smiled at it, some ignored it. But a handful of officers and engineers did not. They traced the lines. They understood the battlefield behind them. They saw not a kettle, but a survival system. It would be called the boiling vessel, or simply BV, not a weapon, not armour, not propulsion. Yet, it would change armoured warfare as much as any gun or engine. Because at the heart of war, beneath strategy and steel, lies a simple fact. Soldiers are human. And war forgets that until someone redraws the rules. Soon the idea would reach design offices, workshops and test sites. Soon tanks would come not only with cannons but with care, and soon British armour losses during rest breaks would fall, not by luck but by engineering. But here, in North Africa, before innovation arrived, before armies adapted, before the kettle entered the tank, the desert still demanded payment in exhaustion and blood. As the sun sets over sand and wreckage, one question rises with the heat. How many more lives would be lost before the simplest invention on the battlefield finally found its place inside a tank? Like the video and subscribe, sometimes history turns on the smallest designs, not the biggest guns. October 1942, El Alamein, Egypt. Dawn bleeds across the sand, light rising cold and sharp over the armoured spearhead of the British 8th Army. Engines idle low, exhaust fumes drifting like ghostly ribbons. Inside a Churchill tank, crewmen brace for another day of war, helmets scraping steel, hands trembling not from fear but from exhaustion and thirst. Hours inside a tank bleed into each other, engines rumble, guns recoil, dust suffocates, sweat stings eyes. The desert is not terrain, it is a living enemy. Heat rises past 50°C, air grows thick with fumes, rations are dry, water warm, salt crusts on lips, men hallucinate movement where only heat waves dance. The mind slips first, then aim, then judgment. Tank warfare isn't only metal versus metal. It is human endurance against the impossible. One crewman murmurs, "A brew would clear my head." His commander nods. Every man knows the ritual. The tank halts, hatch opens, mess tins clang. The kettle flame flickers. A simple act, boiling water, becomes a fatal gamble. A German spotter sees the steam plume, faint but unmistakable. Coordinates whispered into a radio. A flash on the horizon, artillery howls in, metal shrieks, the tank erupts in fire. A second crew nearby rushes to pull bodies from the hatches. They drag men across burning sand. Medics arrive too late. Another 4 names for a casualty ledger that grows heavier by the day. Across the desert, field commanders note not just enemy action, but patterns, losses during rest periods. Casualty spikes tied not to offensives, but routine moments when soldiers drop their guard to be human. A cup of tea, a bite to eat, a breath of clean air. The moments war punishes hardest. British officers send field reports. War diaries record the truth in pencil and dust. Crew casualties sustained while boiling rations. Fatal incident during brew stop. Loss of vehicle and personnel. Off-duty moment. War rarely bends for comfort, but this war, ultra mechanized, mobile, relentless, is teaching a lesson armies have ignored since the first armoured vehicle rolled onto a battlefield. A tank is only effective if its crew survives long enough to fight. Meanwhile, England. Hospitals far from the front overflow with bandaged men. The wounded operator, the one who sketched the first boiling vessel, lies among them. His leg healed enough to walk, his lungs still raw from smoke, but his mind fixed on one idea. Tea inside the tank. Warm water without death. Comfort without exposure. He is not alone. Nurses carry letters from units begging for internal boiling apparatus. Officers speak quietly in corridors. Engineers trade notes. Something small is stirring. Not command orders, but human realization. A tank designer at Woolwich Arsenal receives a copy of the sketch. He studies it not with humour, but respect. He has seen the casualty reports. He knows men freeze in winter, faint in heat, ration, cold food for days. He knows too many return burned not from shells alone, but from improvised camp stoves knocked over in steel coffins. War makes necessities obvious or eventually, and here in blue lines on thin paper is a necessity made visible. The designer refines it, adds insulation, tin alloy replaced with steel, connects it not to fuel tanks, too dangerous, but to the vehicle's electrical system. Engineers argue safety, power load, wiring complications. Officers debate cost, but others say 5 quiet words. This will save lives. December 1942, Bovington, England. Inside Britain's armoured school, prototype kettles hiss softly. A tank crackles with heat during engine testing. Beside it, a small metal box warms water in complete safety. Test crews glance skeptically, then curiously, then gratefully. A corporal tastes the first brew ever made inside a British tank. He doesn't smile, he exhales. Relief, not joy. A simple cup, a simple answer. Yet bureaucracy resists. Commanders ask, will this distract crews? Will it drain electrical power? Is it worth manufacturing time? Then a single document lands on a desk. Casualty statistics from North Africa. Numbers stark, unforgiving. Losses tied to exposure events. Patterns undeniable. Human need quantified by death count. Suddenly, no one asks if it's worth it. The Army greenlights production. The invention earns a name. Simple, direct, almost humble. Boiling vessel, shortened by crews to a single proud code word. BV. Not glamorous, not a weapon. But in war, survival tools outrank symbols. Factories begin fitting BVs into new vehicles. Field workshops retrofit existing tanks when they can. Soldiers hear rumours. A kettle inside. Some laugh. Some disbelieve. Others whisper like it's a miracle. Warmth in a world built entirely of cold steel. Back in the desert, the war shifts. Tanks roll again, sand whipping against armour. But something changes in crews' routines. Less movement outside. Fewer silhouettes on dunes. Heat remains. Sand still kills. But survival seeps into the steel. When tea boils inside, no German gunner sees steam. No sniper sees motion. No artillery spotter marks coordinates. The battlefield grows quieter, not because the enemy stops firing, but because fewer British crewmen stand outside their tanks to die. War diaries quietly note a decline. Casualty reports soften, not victory, preservation, not triumph, endurance. A kettle does not win battles, but it prevents losing men before battles begin, and that changes everything. In the silence between engagements, one truth settles across the armoured regiments. Sometimes the smallest invention protects the greatest courage. Yet as British tanks roll forward, from desert heat to European mud, one question now follows every armoured column. If survival rests on such a simple idea, what other human needs have armies overlooked in the name of war? January 1943, Tunisia. A Cromwell tank sits concealed behind scrub and rock, engine breathing low as a distant exchange of fire echoes across rolling sand and scrub. Inside, the 5-man crew waits, muscles tense, eyes raw, nerves worn thin from hours sealed in steel. They don't speak, they don't move. The enemy is somewhere ahead, dust clouds hinting at armoured formations shifting across the horizon. In the suffocating belly of the tank, exhaustion wraps around them like heat. The commander wipes grit from his eyelids. The gunner flexes cramped fingers. The driver works his jaw to stay awake. There's no breeze, no fresh air, just the metallic taste of fumes and rations that turn to paste in a dry mouth. Then, a quiet click, a soft hum, the faintest whisper of boiling water. Every man's head lifts, not in alarm, but in instinctive relief. Inside a tiny armoured compartment, sealed from flame and danger, water begins to simmer in the boiling vessel. Steam curls gently inside the tank, harmless, invisible to the enemy. Cups are passed hand to hand. Tea, strong, dark, nothing fancy, fills tin mugs, a sip, a breath. Shoulders lower, muscles loosen, minds sharpen. Not luxury, not indulgence, recovery. These are men who reload shells by feel in total darkness, who sleep in corners curled against ammunition racks, who brace for explosions without flinching. Yet here, in this moment, humanity returns through warmth and routine. Outside, German 80mm gunners sweep tree lines, scanning for movement. Long-range scopes poised for the familiar ritual. Tank crews climbing out with mugs, plates, stoves. But today there is no movement. No heads above hatches. No silhouettes against the sky. The sand stays still. The tank stays sealed. The British live. In command tents and field HQs, officers begin noticing an unexpected trend. Fewer casualty notifications tied to non-combat exposure. Losses quietly decrease. No dramatic announcement. No newspaper headline. Just the subtle, life-saving effect of a heat-powered metal box wired to a tank's batteries. It doesn't change the war overnight, but it changes the experience of war. And in combat, human endurance is as strategic as armour thickness. England, Bovington Camp, early 1944. Word spreads among newly trained crews. You'll get a BV in your tank. Proper brew, even under fire. Recruits react with disbelief, laughter, pride, an invention so simple, yet so deeply British, it borders on myth. But test crews at the Armoured Fighting Vehicle School aren't laughing. They know what it means to fight 12 hours straight in biting cold or choking heat. They know hunger turns calm, thinking into panic. They know thirst dulls instincts, slows loading hands, makes men sloppy in combat. And sloppy in a tank means dead. The BV becomes more than an appliance. It becomes a promise that someone, somewhere cared enough to think about the people inside the machine. Among officers, a quiet shift takes place too. Commanders who once dismissed crew comfort as softness begin to understand something new. A tank is not just steel. A tank is its crew. A well-rested crew reloads faster, thinks faster, navigates faster, makes fewer mistakes. They detect ambushes, they judge terrain better. They fire first. And first shot often decides everything. The boiling vessel is not about tea, it is about combat cognitive performance. And for British troops, tea simply happened to be the most effective delivery system. France, Normandy, August 1944. Mud replaces sand, rain replaces heat. But the battlefield rhythm doesn't change. Steel rolls, steel duels, steel burns. The enemy now blends into hedgerows and stone villages. Snipers lurk. Mortars fall without warning. Tank crews can go days without stepping out, sleeping in half shifts, eating cold rations, keeping engines warm to avoid ambush at dawn. Inside a Churchill or Sherman Firefly, rumble, fatigue, fear, all mix in stale, diesel-scented air. Then again, click, hum, steam. The BV brews tea. The crew lives another hour sharper, steadier, present. Outside, across hedgerows, elite German tank hunters watch for British silhouettes. But there are fewer now. Casualty reports, once thick with men killed while brewing up, begin to thin. A habit that once cost lives now saves them. Later research conducted by the Royal Army Medical Corps would quantify the effect. Armoured crew fatigue drops. Reaction time improves. Casualties related to exposure collapse. And though modern sources rarely headline it, frontline accounts credit the BV with preventing countless quiet tragedies. This device didn't influence strategy on maps, but it protected the minds inside the strategy. War Office, London, winter 1944. Engineers finalised design refinements. Steel casing, safety thermostat. Self-sealing lid to avoid scalding in combat shocks. An invention born from necessity matures into standardised doctrine. Britain doesn't announce it proudly, it installs it silently. Soon, tank specifications include an unprecedented line. Crew boiling apparatus, fitted. No other nation does this yet. None sees the battlefield through the same blend of practicality and human tradition. But they will. One day, American, Russian, NATO main battle tanks, Abrams, Leopard, Challenger, T-Series, all will carry crew heating systems, hot water units, even ration warmers. Innovation rarely begins with grand ambition. Sometimes it begins with a wounded soldier, a sketch, and a nation unwilling to let its men die thirsty. War is fought with steel, fuel, and ammunition, but it is won by minds that remain human inside the machine. And in tanks rolling from desert hell to French rain to final victory in German fields, a quiet truth simmers beneath armour plates. A cup of tea can steady a hand better than another inch of steel can protect it. In a war, defined by engines and cannons, one humble invention reminds us that even inside the deadliest machines ever built, soldiers remain men first. So as engines idle in morning fog and weary eyes scan horizons, a question lingers as softly as steam inside steel walls. If caring for the human inside the armour saves more lives than adding armour itself, What other overlooked necessities could shape the future of warfare? If you value forgotten stories like this, like and subscribe. We bring humanity back to the history of war. February 1945, Holland. Dawn creeps pale across a frozen landscape. British tanks sit half buried in mist and frost, silhouettes like sleeping beasts waiting for orders. No sand here, only ice forming on steel plates, mud hardened to iron, breath fogging inside cramped armour. War has shifted continents, climates, tactics, but one constant remains. Men inside tanks cannot survive on armour alone. A Sherman Firefly crew huddles in silence. Outside, German patrols move through the skeletal remains of villages. The tank crew hears distant engines, boots crunching snow, the crack of rifle fire. They do not open their hatches, not here, not now, not with snipers hiding in church towers and shattered attics. In earlier campaigns, mornings meant someone climbing out to heat water over a small flame, hands shaking from cold and fear. But today, the ritual is quiet, sealed behind steel. A switch flicks, current flows. The boiling vessel hums to life. Steam rises invisibly inside the hull, as the first warmth of the day fills tin mugs. Outside, frost coats the turret. Inside, warmth travels hand to hand, a silent act of resistance against fatigue and winter and war itself. A tank cannot feel cold, but men can, and machines only fight as long as their crews endure. Behind the lines, Field Workshop, Belgium. Fitters and mechanics cluster around a tank stripped open for maintenance. Frozen hoses, clogged lines, cracked fan belts. Winter is a different enemy, one that ambushes machinery as effectively as bullets. But while they replace damaged parts and rework armour seams, one small device sits untouched and trusted, the BV. Even under ice, it works. Even after days of mud and vibration and shell shock, it works. Soldiers begin treating it not as a perk, but as survival gear. On supply convoys, trucks now carry spares. Training manuals begin to mention its maintenance. The British Army, often mocked for tradition, now finds itself leading in innovation where no one expected it. Not in guns, not in armour, but in crew endurance. Command briefing, Brussels. Staff officers pin maps to boards. Shift counters across Europe discuss bridges, fuel depots, German armour movements. Behind them lies a folder, reports from medical corps and armoured units. Not strategy, not logistics, human data, reduced cases of heat exhaustion, improved alertness during long operations, fewer exposure casualties, increased sustained combat readiness. War does not reward kindness, it rewards survival. And the BV, once a sketch from a burned soldier, is now a military asset in every measurable way. Commanders learn a lesson the battlefield rarely teaches gently: support the human weapon or lose the war before it's fought. Germany, crossing the Rhine. British armour surges eastward. Cities burn, bridges fall, resistance stiffens. Some tanks charge forward, hatches open, commanders exposed in desperate pushes. Others move cautiously, sealed tight in. Ambush country. All know this war is nearing its peak and its most dangerous days. Crew lives still hang on seconds and instincts. Tanks take hits, some burn, some crew escape, some do not. The BV does not stop death. It reduces the unnecessary ones, the stupid ones, the avoidable ones. And in war, eliminating avoidable waste is a victory on its own. Inside one tank, a gunner rubs his temples, voice hoarse from hours of tension. "Never thought I'd fight a war powered by tea," he mutters. The loader laughs softly, not because it's funny, but because it's true. The BV has become folklore, a quiet symbol, proof that someone, somewhere, chose to protect the ordinary moments soldiers lose first in war: warmth, routine, dignity. War ends. Europe, May 1945. Crowds cheer, flags wave, machines rest. Tanks line up in silent rows, crews climb out, blinking in the peace. Some laugh, some collapse, some stare at nothing, thoughts still inside steel walls and fire. Among the debris of conflict, wrecked vehicles, discarded helmets, scorched earth. One object remains unnoticed by civilians, but sacred to those who served inside armour. The BV unit bolted beside radios and turret motors. Nothing heroic to look at, no medals, no poetry. Just metal, wiring, and a switch. But to thousands of tankers, it meant one thing: survival through humanity, not despite it. Post-war Britain, design offices 1946. Engineers sit at desks drafting the next generation of armoured vehicles. Requirements lists fill pages. Armour thickness, gun calibers, turret traverse speeds, power-to-weight ratios. And there, among equations and steel specifications, sits a line that did not exist before this war. Crew boiling vessel. Mandatory. It is a subtle victory, almost invisible. Yet its significance is profound. Armies rarely change through generosity. They change through necessity proven in blood and reports and battlefield truth. The boiling vessel earned its place not by philosophy, but by survival metrics. And quietly, without ceremony, crew welfare becomes a design parameter in future war machines. From this moment forward, armoured fleets across the world, British, American, later even Soviet, adopt internal heating and water systems. The simple need to eat and drink warm in safety becomes global doctrine. Not because it's kind, because it works. In military museums, decades later, children admire cannons and engines. Tourists marvel at armour thickness and sleek profiles. Few notice the small metal box tucked inside, the BV. Guides mention engines, battles, tactics. Rarely do they mention the machine that kept men alive between battles. But veterans remember. They remember desert heat, European frost, and the quiet hum that separated life from death. Steel won the war, but steam sustained the men who drove it. And, in the fading echoes of engines and silence after gunfire, one realization lingers. Sometimes the smallest invention inside a war machine protects the most important part of it, the human being. Yet the world moves forward, building faster jets, bigger guns, stronger armour, and the question echoes across generations of engineers and soldiers alike. If war still depends on human endurance, how will future armies protect the minds and bodies inside tomorrow's machines? 1960s, West Germany. NATO tank crews train in forests instead of deserts. The enemy is no longer Rommel's panzers sweeping across sand. It's the silent threat east of the Iron Curtain. Snow falls on armoured hulls, radios crackle with Cold War tension, and diesel fumes hang in thick winter air. Inside a British Centurion tank, heat radiates softly from a compact steel unit bolted near the radios. A crewman pours water. Another unwraps rations. The modern battlefield is new. Guided missiles, jet aircraft, nuclear strategy. But one sound remains unchanged. The gentle hum of a boiling vessel warming water in a steel shell. Different war, same human need. Tank design has evolved. Thicker armour, night sights, stabilised guns. But something subtle and revolutionary has stayed the same. Crew survival means more than armour thickness. The boiling vessel was never a luxury. It was the first recognition that even the deadliest machines on Earth depend on the alertness, calm, and dignity of the humans inside them. Fort Knox, USA, 1980s. American M1 Abrams crews climb into new machines gleaming in desert camouflage. Turbines roar, computers hum, and in the cramped crew compartment, a familiar device sits quietly. A boiling system for hot drinks and heated rations. British soldiers called it a BV. Americans rename it THU, Crew Heater Unit. Different name, same idea. Because human endurance does not change with flag, doctrine, or generation. Across NATO, Soviet forces quietly adopt similar systems in T-series tanks. Even nations with different cultures, different philosophies of war, come to the same conclusion. A tank crew that eats hot, drinks warm, and stays mentally sharp, fights longer, and survives longer. In armoured museums today, from Bovington to Aberdeen to Kubinka, historians point to armour plates, cannons, engines, But ask a veteran what mattered most in the quiet hours between chaos, and many will tap on a small steel box and simply say, "That thing saved us." Not because it killed the enemy, but because it kept the crew alive long enough to fight the next battle. Modern day, Salisbury Plain, UK. A Challenger 2 tank rolls through mud, turrets sweeping like a steel predator searching open fields. Inside, thermal screens glow, laser rangefinders hum, digital systems track targets kilometers away. Yet, in a corner of the steel womb, steam rises once again from a boiling vessel. A mug clinks against armoured flooring. A crewman warms his hands, breathes in heat, shakes off fatigue. Technology changed, humanity did not. Warfighters today compete in drones, AI, cyber warfare, hypersonic missiles. But in armoured crews across the world, from British Challenger tanks to American Abrams to Russian T-90s, the humble tradition remains. You fight better when you are fed, warm, calm, alive. A war machine is not just armour and firepower. It is a life support system for the humans who operate it. The boiling vessel proves something militaries too often forget. Warfare is not only about destruction, it is about preserving the people who fight. A forgotten sketch, 1942. In archives and museums, the original pencil drawing sits quietly. No medals pinned to it, no plaque in marble, no statue. Just a rough sketch born from injury, carved into paper by a soldier who nearly died for a cup of tea. One line, one idea, one act of care in a world built to strip it away. He did not design a weapon, he designed a chance to live. And thousands lived because of it. Armies study great battles, decisive offensives, legendary generals. But history is also shaped by the unseen victories. The small mercies that keep men alive long enough to return home. A cup of warmth in steel darkness. A moment of humanity in mechanical war. A device so simple that it feels absurd until you count the names it saved. So, as future tanks roar into new ages of warfare filled with computers, drones, and automation, one question rises from steam inside cold armour and desert heat alike. When machines grow more powerful than ever, who will remember that the soldier inside them is still human?